Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got kind of a fun project. I have several improvements that I want to make to the Cyrusher Rover here. I've got a box of new parts and we're going to install all of these today. I think once done, this bike is going to be much better for the type of riding I do, which is kind of back trails, some pretty steep hills and that kind of thing here in the Colorado mountains. So let's get started on that. We'll start by going through this. I'll show you exactly what I'm going to replace, and then we'll get rolling. First off, we're going to start by installing an air fork. This fork is made by Area 13. It is a US based company and they make some pretty nice stuff. So I'm looking forward to getting this on there. That'll be a big improvement for the front end of this bike. The stock bars on this bike have a real high rise, which I find really super comfortable, but I'd like to have a little bit more of an aggressive feel to this bike. So I'm going to put on something like this with a lower rise. The bike comes with a 7-speed Tourney setup here. I'm going to be converting this to a 9-speed Altus setup. So we've got the shifters. We've got a new Altus derailleur. And because we're going from 7-speed to 9-speed, we need to upgrade the chain as well. So we've got a 9-speed chain. Stock gearing on this bike was the 7-speed 1428, and we're going to upgrade that to the 9-speed 1332. This will give me a little bit better climbing ability, and I would have gone with something even larger than this. Ideally, I would have gone up to a 36, something like that. But 36s are kind of hard to find in the freewheel. In a cassette, that's not an issue, but these are just a little bit harder to come by. For the rear suspension of the bike, we're going to get rid of the stock non-adjustable spring shock here, and we're going to put on a Fox air shock on the rear. I got a set of these grips that have the built-in bar ends on them. So those are kind of nice for varying your hand position, and they're real comfortable as well. I'll be replacing the stock seat with something that's a little bit more of a traditional mountain bike style. I'm going to go ahead and put this flat out in both of the tubes as well. This stops me from ever getting it flat with this bike. Stuff does a really great job. So that's kind of it. I'll talk a little bit more about each component as we get to it, but that gives you an overview of what we're going to be working on today, and the bike should be real trail capable once we're done. The setup that I use for these fat bikes works really well, which is a motorcycle stand. I've got a table here, and I've got a lift that I put under the bottom bracket. Raise the front wheel slightly off the ground, and then I can remove the wheel and drop the fork out. This works really well for me. I know that most people aren't going to have this set up, so you may need a helper to hold the bike up while you do this. If you lay the bike on its side, it's possible to do by yourself. You can't really tip it over and do it upside down because you've got to remove the bars and all that stuff. So best way is to have a helper on this. But I'm going to go ahead and get started and just pull the front end off of this bike. All right, so we'll take a look at these two forks. They look pretty much identical in length and offset. Everything looks real good. Steer tube length is the same. So not an issue there. So I do need to remove the race from the stock fork and install it onto this fork. I'm going to go ahead and remove this using tools that most people will have, which is a flat-bladed screwdriver and a mallet. You'll see that there's a cutout here on the back, and if you put your flat-bladed screwdriver right into that, you'll get underneath the lip of this, and you can just tap it off from there. And there we are, it just popped off. The second ring that's on here is a split ring. If you can see that, there's a gap right there. So you can Just put your screwdriver right in that. Expand that a little and that'll come right off. So those are the two pieces that we're looking for, and we're going to go and install them on the other fork. The new fork here is by Area 13. They're a California-based company. They've been around for a while. Let's see if I can get it to where you can read that. It's black on black, so it's a little bit hard to read. This company makes some pretty decent budget air suspension. This is one of their forks. You can get this on their website, area13.com, I believe. I'll put a link down below for this fork. But they retail for right around $200. If you look online for reviews, people seem to really like this Area 13 fork. And at $200, you just can't beat it. So I don't know how long it'll hold up. We'll determine that after a few hundred miles, but it's got a good reputation. This one also comes stock with a split race there. So you just put your screwdriver in there, pop that, and that comes right off. So what we want to do is just slide the ones from the other fork right on there. So that slides on, and then this guy goes over the top of that and locks it in place. And to get that to lock, we'll just tap that down a little bit with the mallet. And there we are, we're good to go. So we're going to go ahead and just reinstall the fork, tighten up the stem here, and then we'll come back and replace the bars once the fork and front wheel are back on the bike. While I've got the front wheel off, I'm going to go ahead and put the sealer in the tube. So I just remove the valve core here. So this stuff is just really exceptionally good stuff. I use it on all of the fat tire bikes that I have, and I never get flats, which is really, really nice. Every once in a while, just check the window over here, see where you're at. And I can tell I'm just about there. Give it one more squirt, and then the rest will go in the rear tire. I'll air this tire up to 10 psi. I generally don't go more than a couple of psi either side of 10. I'm also noticing that this has a hollow axle here, and I could run a quick release on this front wheel. You can never do it on the rear wheels with electric bikes because they have to bolt firmly to the frame so that they don't spin, because all your power's coming through your axle. But here on the front, because I take my front wheel off to get it in and out of the bike in and out of my car, I'm going to go ahead and put a quick release on here. So I got to just dig through my box and see what I've got. Alright, so in my box of miscellaneous skewers, I have a 175 millimeter one. That's going to work perfectly for this. Okay, there we go, and now that's going to be a whole lot easier for me to get my wheel on and off every time I need to. Alright, I've got the two bolts back in my caliper, but they are not tightened up yet. What I want to do is come up here and squeeze my front brake a couple of times. It doesn't hurt to move your wheel back and forth a couple of times while you squeeze that lever. And then once this has sort of found its spot where everything's centered, then you can go ahead and tighten up those two bolts that hold your caliper on. And come back and make sure everything's completely snug here. Okay, now let off your brakes, and you shouldn't have any dragging there. It should be nice and smooth like that. So when you hit your brakes, you've got brakes. The rest of the time there's no rubbing. That means the caliper is aligned with the rotor and everything's good. So looking fine there. All right, so the next thing we're going to work on is replacing the stock rear shock with this Fox shock. And I did get this on eBay. This is a 6-inch from center to center. That's how these shocks are measured. And so center of this bolt hole to center of that bolt hole, 6 inches. So don't buy 6.5-inch shock here. That's a real common size. These 6-inch are a little bit harder to come by, and you won't find them on Amazon. I doubt DNM may sell a 6-inch shock, but I'm not sure. The first thing we'll do is remove the old shock. Should just be a bolt at the top and a bolt at the back here. And this should come out. The bike will try to collapse if you don't have something underneath it. So you need to lift the bike from the bottom, or have a helper hold it up as well. That'll work. You can lay it on its side as well. That's perfectly fine. One of the first things you'll notice is that these are in line with each other and these are 90 degrees off. So all you do is take your shock and turn that 90 degrees. So now we're working with pivot points that are on the correct plane. Now the next thing that's obvious is that the bolt hole diameters are different. So what we're going to check and see is if these spacers here will work on this shock. If they will not, then I will end up having to drill out these aluminum spacers to the same size as this. I like to use these Nipex pliers. They have smooth jaws on them. They're made in Germany and they're a real nice plier, but you can grab a hold of things like this and you won't gnarl them up. So it's a great way to get things apart without damaging them. Let's pull all of these little aluminum spacers. Ooh, these guys are in there really tight. There we go. Work this guy out of here. Take a minute. Go. So worst case, we're just going to drill these out. But I'm hoping that the eyelets are actually the same size and that we'll be able to just exchange the spacers on here. So as it turns out, I have the perfect bushing for this end, but these guys here, I do not, and I'm going to have to drill out these aluminum ones that came on this shock. So nothing wrong with that. I just have to drill them to the correct diameter, and then everything should bolt up fine. So heading over to the drill press and I'll get that done. Okay, so the bushing's drilled out fine. Everything looks good. And we're ready to mount the shock on the bike. I'm putting some grease on these bushings so that everything rotates nicely. And we're ready to put it back together. We've got a nylon washer that goes on either side of this. So that's going to be the setup for the upper end. And this side just mounts in like this with the bolt through. This is just a little bit hard to get to, but just take your time, you'll get it. Okay, and then I'm using a little bit of grease on everything just to make sure everything moves nicely, and that when water gets up into these linkages that they don't freeze up, it doesn't freeze up anything or cause corrosion. Okay, and we're just snugging that up. I did put a little bit of Loctite on the other side of this bolt, so nothing should come loose. Don't want anything vibrating loose on me. And that is the new shock. That's going to be a huge improvement over what came stock on this bike. I have adjustable air, I have adjustable rebound, and it's going to work great. we'll move from the rear shock down to the drivetrain. So I'm going to start by removing the derailleur. I'll break the chain here, get that out of the way. I think I need to remove the drive side of the crank here because I need to open up this cover, I believe. I know I need to remove the battery. The whole reason for that is I need to feed more cable back around so that I've got a bigger loop here. The new derailleur that we're putting on has a different approach for the cable, and so I need to come around more here. So I need to have a couple more inches of cable housing than I do here, but fortunately, since we're dropping these bars going from the high rise to the low rise, I'm going to end up with some extra cable at this end. So I just need to feed it all the way through and back down, and we should be good. So I just disconnected the cable from my shifter up here. It pulled out the inner cable, and the housing itself I can easily pull back and forth through the bike here. I think you can see that move. And then I just come back here and I can pull this other direction as well. So everything's flowing through here just fine. I didn't have to remove anything. Just pull the amount of cable that you need from this end and you should be good. I've been comparing this bike to the Cyrusher Ranger, a very similar looking bike. As I go along, I'm going to point out differences that I see. One of them being that the derailleur hanger on this is not replaceable. It's formed as part of the swing arm here, the lower rear triangle. So if you were to bend or break this, you'd need to buy this new piece here versus just replacing a replaceable hanger. Now the Ranger does have the replaceable hanger. So that's one difference that I'm seeing right now. I need to replace the freewheel on this bike too. So it's going to be easier to do that right now versus after I get a derailleur hung back on here and all, because everything's out of the way. It's a nice, clear, easy access to everything that I need to get to. So what I'm going to do is turn the bike around, put the front wheel into the clamp here, clamp it down, lift the rear slightly, kind of the way I did with the rear shock. And we're going to go ahead and pull this rear wheel and replace the freewheel in it. Okay, now all I need to do is come down here, cut some zip ties that hold the big power cable to the frame. Right behind here, we've got a big connector. That's where we're going to disconnect the motor from. So we need to cut a couple more zip ties on past that, just so we've got some slack. This will unscrew and pull apart. With the plug to your motor disconnected, take a good look at how your cable's routed here. There's a little cutout on the side of the axle that this comes through, but you want to put this all back together looking exactly like it is now. So your cable sort of comes out in a downward angle there, but facing forward. And also you'll have some spacers inside your wheel here. Try to keep those in place and just put the nuts back on so that they don't get mixed up from side to side. Seeing that this side has a retainer on it. There's an Allen here that you need to remove. And what this does is stop this axle from accidentally dropping out and coming, separating from the bike. So that's a safety feature. But I'm noticing on the other side here, even though there is a hole for one, we've just got a regular washer and a recess there. So no retainer on the brake side. So as that wheel drops out, I'm not going to go any further than that. See, these are some of the spacers I'm talking about. We're just going to put these back on in the same order. I want to show you something here as well. These washers that are on the inside of the rear arm have this locating sort of piece on them, and that goes towards the bottom of that slot. So you want the axle to be able to go all the way up to the top. See, if you reverse to this, the axle wouldn't be able to go all the way to the top. It would get stopped by that. So keep that little tab, the locating tab, towards the bottom of the axle when you put everything back together. And by the bottom of the axle, I mean there are flat sides on this. So the flat sides have to go side to side. The round sides go top and bottom. So I like to work on these wheels on top of a plastic bucket. So go get your Home Depot bucket and set that like that. That keeps the rotor from getting bent, puts all the weight onto the spokes, and the fact that it's plastic, it doesn't scratch anything. So that's just a convenient way to put it at working height and be able to do everything without doing any damage. So take your freewheel and cassette removal tool. I always get questions about these. When you buy one, you can get them on Amazon for, I don't know, $6 or $7. They're real inexpensive. Try to get the thinnest wall you can. So that's a real thin area there. And you also need a hole in the center that's big enough to go over these large axles that are on the e-bike motors. So it's a much larger axle than you find on your standard bicycle. And so because of that, you need a bigger hole there. I've bought them before. Actually, this is one that I bought quite a while ago that you can see the hole wasn't big enough, so I drilled it out so that it fits over the axle. Since then, the ones that I've bought have all had the larger hole, and sometimes they're even marketed for e-bikes. But that'll drop in, and then you're able to remove your freewheel here. I find with freewheels that the longer they've been on, the tighter they are, the harder they are to get off. So, all right, so here are the two freewheels. You should always put grease on these threads, as I've just done. You don't have to tighten these up too much because the force from you pedaling is actually what cranks these onto the threads there and makes them super tight over time. I just rolled the wheel back underneath here. Now the flats that are on this axle need to be oriented right, and they're side to side. Remember that wire's coming out kind of on the bottom side there. And now what I'll do is just lower this guy here, and this will put that right on. If you've got a helper, you can have them slowly lower that onto the axle, and everything will be good. Remember that your little tab washers are oriented right and on the inside. And then once we're all the way down, we can go ahead and tighten things up. Once everything's tightened up, just spin your freewheel a couple of times, make sure there's no binding, that there's clearance between everything, and you should be good to go. All right, so the wheel's back on, everything's tight. Now I just need to come back, reconnect the motor, and zip tie everything back into place. So make sure that all your wires, that your brake lines, everything that are zip tied to these little mounts along the bottom here, and that will keep them away from the spinning parts and anything that might wear through them. Okay, all the zip ties are in place to hold everything out of the way. So we got one here, one here, one here, and don't forget the one that's on the inside that goes around the big plug that stops it from getting into the wheel. You know what I forgot to do while I had the wheel off? Put the tire sealing in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll just put the valve at about that position, let the air out, and squeeze the rest of this bag in for flat protection. I'll get the bike turned around on the stand here, and we'll put the derailleur on. Okay, pull out a little bit extra cable because this comes all the way around here. Connects right there. All right, so everything's zip tied in place. We've got a bend that I like here. You want to keep a pretty gradual bend through your outer housing. If you make that too tight of a turn, then the cable binds a little bit and it'll affect your shifting. So keep a nice big loop there. Okay, the next thing is put on a chain. This is quick chain, 9-speed, and I will be using these type of quick master links. The chain is on. I'm going to go ahead and take the bike down off the stand. That way I can swap out the bars and put on the new shifter. The next thing to do is to pull everything off of the bars. After doing that, I'll put in the new bars, put on the new shifter, and the new grips. I don't like to waste anything, especially like new grips and all that. These are actually real nice grips, and I'm going to use them on a different project. Just putting on something else so that I have more hand positions. But to get these off, I use a little brake cleaner and some sort of tool that I can work underneath the grip a little ways here. So if I can slide that in, put a little shot of brake cleaner underneath there, and then roll this around, and that brake cleaner will make its way underneath and loosen everything up. And then once it dries, it's not oily, it's not going to cause problems, and we can put this back on another bike and reuse them. Go to the side that has the most amount of stuff bundled together, which is in this case the left side, and just start sliding this stuff on before you mount the bars. It'll make things a whole lot easier. And so you've got all of your little pieces, parts right there. This one can hang up there. You put your bar on like here, go ahead and clamp that. If you try to put all this on once the bars are already mounted, often these wires aren't long enough to actually reach out beyond the end of the bar. We've got the new 9-speed shifter here in the box. These are real nice shifters. I like these a lot. They're real ergonomic and work really well. This Altus stuff really is nice quality. Be careful when you're pulling these out that you don't kink your shift cable there. Sometimes they're packaged kind of strangely. So that's what we're looking for right there. Just run a bead down this, and then we'll put this on the bar and feed them through. Try not to waste any of that stuff. Okay. Okay, so we'll put our shifter on. We're going to grab our cable end here that we disconnected from the old shifter, and we'll just feed this right on through. This is a continuous cable all the way to the derailleur, so this should just feed through nice and easy. There. So when I get ready to start putting things where I want them and adjusting and locking down everything, I always start with the grips here, because that's going to tell you exactly how far in everything is going to need to be. So I can tentatively put that there, and I can put my brake right there, and then my shifter there. So from that point, I can go ahead and adjust and tighten everything down. All right, here we are with the new setup. You can see that the new Altus shifter is accessed from underneath the bar. Real nice low profile when compared to the SIS that was on top of the bar and was pretty much just using your thumbs to shift back and forth on this one. So this is a nicer look in my opinion, and a little bit more out of the way. I'm going to run through the gears now. Everything seems like it's nicely adjusted. We're going right through with no issues whatsoever. Very easy setup on the shifters. Yeah, shifted nicely. So when I just touched the brakes, I got a bit of a squeak out of it, and it reminded me of another thing that I want to do for this bike. These Tektro brake pads are organic, meaning I think they have a little bit of metal in them, but for the most part, they're a very soft pad. But they are a much softer pad than what comes on most of these e-bikes. They do wear out faster, so you need to swap them out more often. But they're very inexpensive. I think these are about $8 a set, something like that. And they will last you probably a couple of months at least. But it'll get rid of an awful lot of squeaking and just a more progressive, positive feel out of the brakes. This brake pad swap is something that I do with almost all of the e-bikes that I get. Because they come with some really super hard, often metallic pads that I think the manufacturers put on them because they last a long time, so you don't have to replace your brake pads very often, but they don't have the best feel. They don't give you a real progressive feel for the braking, and they also can be really, really noisy. So just like what we did with the front wheel, when you're putting your brake caliper on, you want to tighten these down to where they're just about touch and then back them off a half a turn. Hold your brake lever in and then tighten these up the rest of the way, and that'll align your caliper with your rotor. One of the last things is to loosen up the two bolts on the seat posts here. Take the old seat off and put on the new. Okay, let's see if we can get this new seat on there. I think that's going to make a big difference on how the bike feels as well. I do like the big cushy e-bike seats for cruising and all, but when you get off-road they can be a little bit strange. I'll try to keep this seat relatively flat, maybe just a little bit nose down. And that should work pretty well. There we go. We're real close to being done with this bike. I think I've got all of the major things done today that I wanted to get done. I will not add a ride video onto the end of this because we're running a little bit long, and I've got about probably 200 clips that I have to piece together to make one video here. I've been getting questions about how does this bike compare to the Ranger. The Ranger has a Bafang motor. This one's unbranded. I don't see anything on it, but I would bet money that it too is a Bafang. The battery on this bike has been holding up really well on longer rides. Did really well on some steep climbs and all that, holding a charge. So even though the battery is smaller than what's on the Ranger, it does very well. Overall, all the welds look great. I don't have any complaints about that stuff. I will say that I have noticed a couple of things on this bike, and I think that the factory may cut a few corners as far as finish on this bike when compared to the Ranger, and that may be where they're saving some of their money. I noticed like here, we've got a bunch of like dings in the aluminum that was painted over, whereas on the Ranger that wouldn't have passed. This would have all been smoothed before it was painted. On the other side of the rear, right here, there are some grind marks underneath the paint that you wouldn't see on the Ranger. So maybe finish is a little bit less than what the Ranger is, and maybe that's where they're cutting some corners and saving you some money. So let's go component by component real quick, and we'll talk about what all this cost. So grips, $8 a piece. The bars I had, but if you were going to buy those, they're going to cost you about $20 online, Amazon, Temu, one of those. The front forks, as I mentioned, are from Area 13. You can go to their website and you can buy these brand new for $200. Brake pads are going to cost you about $8 to $10 per set, depending on where you buy them. The Fox float shock here, you're going to have to find that on eBay. That's going to cost you anywhere from $30 to $75, depending on what kind of deal you find on eBay. The Altus derailleur I paid $40 for. The chain I paid another $20. I paid $20 for the freewheel, although I'd spend a little bit more and get something a little nicer next time. The ratcheting function on this is a little bit strange. The Altus shifters up here I paid $35 for. You can expect to pay somewhere between $300 and $400 for these upgrades here. Well, it's been kind of a long day because it takes so long to shoot these short videos on what I'm doing and all. If I'm just sitting down and doing the work, it's one thing, but trying to capture it all on film is a whole different thing. I hope you found this interesting, and thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you on the next one.